Greetings from the cosmic horrors. The stars are right once again, and the great old ones are allowed us to talk about for 30 minutes H.P. Lovecraft, the horror writer who is a genre unto himself. I am your cosmic host, Mark Griffin, executive of the Lovecraft estate on Yaga, joined in by two from Material World, David Guffey, a professor at Miss Pataki University, and Richard Wilson, who is a spy who came in from the cold wastes of unknown Gaddafi. One of the oddest authors of Lovecraft's juvenile reads is Kirk Munroe. Munroe was born in Wisconsin, yet Lovecraft never mentioned him to his members of his circle who hailed from the cheese state. Munroe is best remembered today for a tennis court in Miami named in honor of him. He was also a founder of the League of American Wheelmen, though today is known as the League of American Bicyclists. Unlike Lovecraft, Munroe was an active outdoorsman. Around the age of 16, he became a surveyor's helper in an expedition that spanned Kansas to California to find a route of the first transcontinental railroad. He claimed to have fought off Native Americans and that he was once wounded during an attack while 8 other members of his party were killed. He also claimed to have met General George Custer, Wild Bill Hickok, and even Kit Carson. At the age of 26, he was a reporter for the New York Sun newspaper, and before he was 30, he was the first editor of the Harper's Young People magazine. During the same time, he began a 5-year term as Commodore of the New York Canoe Club and was a founder of the American Canoe Association, which still exists today. During the winter of 1881-82, he took his sailing canoe, Psyche, to Florida, where he developed a lifelong love for the state. He loved it so much that he bought property and built the first tennis court in Dyad County, which I guess is why a tennis court is named in honor for him there to this day. Now a resident of Florida and with his wife Mary, he is the founder of the Biscayne Bay Yacht Club. For whatever reason, Munroe temporarily left the warmth of the Sunshine State for Alaska, where he confronted Cthulhu. Just kidding. At this point, you're wondering, where does Lovecraft fit into all this? During periods when Munroe was not being rough and rugged, he was writing popular boys' adventure stories. At the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, he was voted the most popular author by 10,000 children. His first story, Wakula, a story of adventure in Florida, recounts the experience of siblings Mark and Ruth Elmer after moving to Florida with their parents. The Floridian adventure includes such things, and I kid you not, going to an auction and Sunday school. While not great by today's standards, Jim Farr, a reviewer on Goodreads, began, it was an interesting look at North Florida in the late 19th century, and should be of interest to anyone familiar with the geography, and natural resources of the area around Wakula Springs. Lovecraft did like Florida, even visited there, but it wasn't because of Munroe. In fact, he never mentioned reading this book. Remarkably, what Lovecraft gravitated toward was Munroe's Alaska adventures, which seems odd, considering that Lovecraft hated the cold. Yawgoth, but it's cold today, as he complained to Clark Ashton Smith. Even though he couldn't bear the cold, he was fascinated by it. When writing to Helen V. Sully, who was planning a trip to the Canadian Rockies, he said, "I envy your sight, even though smoke obscured, of Vancouver, a locality I read of long ago in the boys' books of Kirk Munroe. Ever since those days, the idea of the Puget Sound region and of Alaska has had a curious sort of fascination for me, though no doubt the actual territory falls far short of the bygone and romanticized descriptions." 2 of Munroe's books in particular, Fur Sealed Tooth and its sequel, Snowshoes and Sledges, in Lovecraft's words, captivated my imagination, all the more so because my constitution could never endure. I can't go out whenever it's under 20 plus degrees. So Lovecraft was living vicariously through Kirk Munroe. L. Sprank de Camp said Lovecraft was only comfortable at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. When it reached 90 degrees, he was full of life. There may have been a medical reason for this, but we'll discuss this in a later episode. The cold does show up in Lovecraft's fiction, whether it be the unknown Gaddafi in the cold waste, or Dr. Mazur in cool air, who cannot live in a temperature above 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Unlike other things that brought him discomfort, Lovecraft didn't evilize the cold as he did with sea life. After all, Gaddafi is Randolph Carter's dream quest, and Dr. Mazur was a friend of the narrator living in a city he found unbearable. So his frigid apartment was a refuge for the narrator, and he struggled to save his life when the doctor's cooling system was failing. Lovecraft did brave the cold himself in 1922 to travel to Massachusetts visiting his Bostonian friends in amateur journalism, and to see the witch house in Salem. The vacation didn't stop there. He continued on to a part of Massachusetts he hadn't been to before, Marblehead. S.T. Josie, the top Lovecraft scholar, noted that Marblehead is one of the most charming little backwaters in Massachusetts, full of well-restored colonial houses, crooked and narrow streets, and a spectral hilltop burying ground from which one can derive a magnificent panoramic view of the city and the nearby harbor. Marblehead then was frozen in time when America was still colonial. Lovecraft was awestruck. This city became his steeple-imposing Kingsport, inspiring such stories as The Festival, Terrible Old Man, and The Strange High House in the Mist. So it benefited Lovecraft to step out into the cold. David and Richard, our Lovecraftian word of the month is non-Euclidean geometry. What does that mean?
I don't know. I think I know it if I see it.
That's the definition of it. I can't describe it, but I'll know it if I see it.
Yeah.
I'd say as far geometry that doesn't conform to what we consider as far as the scientific limits and that kind of thing, as far as something again where the dimensions and the shape of it is just something that is off-putting to the human eye, where it's seen as alien or unnatural.
Right. I would always, for some reason, when I think about it, I would think about German expressionism in the old movies, the old black and white movies, or in
You're talking like Dr. Caligari?
Yeah. And then Dark City, that's a good one. And that's pretty, that's also very Lovecraftian.
Yeah, very much shifting.
Kind of loom up over you and bend down, sort of bend over you. And anyway, you can enlighten us now, I guess.
Yeah, with the technical definition is literally any geometry is not the same as Euclidean geometry. And I just hate those type of definitions. That's boring.
Yeah, that's pretty simple.
Yeah, it's like, they don't really tell you anything. But Euclidean geometry is a mathematical system attributed to the Alexandrian Greek mathematician Euclid. And it has a technical definition, which I won't share here because my math skills are about as bad as Lovecraft's. And it wouldn't do me any good to explain it. But basically, Euclidean geometry is about straight lines, squares, cubes, angles at 45 and 90 degrees. Nice straight shapes. Non-Euclidean involves things like curves. But Lovecraft redefined it to almost like mean impossible angles, defying physics and gravity, which is what we were talking about, Richard and David.
Yeah.
And Raleigh, he gets mentioned as description in Call of Cthulhu, gives the readers the impression that M.C. Escher must have designed that city. It's a tough term.
Doesn't Dreams in the Witch House sort of use that as well? Like there's the angles of the house or the angles of the room he's in don't quite, they don't match it. They're non-Euclidean. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I read that.
The word does show up in Dreams of the Witch House, but it's not used to describe it, even though you would say, that the room is non-Euclidean. That was one thing about Lovecraft is that, he would use that word often to describe it. Basically, he would use non-Euclidean to describe things, but he never would say it outright that it was. Because that word only shows up in 2 of his works, according to Roof, the word counter. I find it a little hard to believe. How it shows up in Dreams of the Witch House is possibly Gilman ought not to have studied so hard. Non-Euclidean calculus and quantum physics are enough to stretch any brain. When one mixes them with folklore and tries to trace strange backgrounds in multidimensional reality beyond the ghoulish hints of the Gothic tales, the wild whispers of the chimney corners, one can hardly expect to be wholly free from mental tension. So, essentially, it was something that drove him insane. So that's.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but it wasn't used as an active description of something, whether it be, a house or a structure of some kind versus, okay.
Yeah, he would talk about things having impossible angles and stuff like that, but he didn't normally, use that. And I was a little bit surprised that it was just, only mentioned 2 times in his work because, it's like one of those words that you so associate with him that I figured it popped up a lot more. And I'd have an update of another word that we talked about in a previous episode, on Cyclopean. I was reading a book of poetry by Ron Whitehood, Kentucky's outlaw poet, He sent me a few copies of some of his new books, and one of them is titled "Disobey," and one of the poems in is titled, I can't say the whole thing because I do our library program, but it's the Blank House Manifesto. And you care to figure out how you use cyclopean in the poem?
I have a feeling it's going to be something to do with the toilet seat.
Yeah, well, you're a little bit, you're close. You're very close. It actually referred to the butthole.
Oh, God.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah, I was going in another direction.
Yeah, the way he phrased it is like your posterior one-eyed cyclopean peering down into the midnight bottom of the outhouse. So
I hope children don't watch this show.
yeah. So that's our thing right there. That's our update on cyclopean, a new use for it, that we can add to the dictionary.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All right, and our elder god of the month is the Migos. So who are they?
They're the insects, whatever's from Whisper in Darkness, aren't they?
Fungus life forms or whatever you'd refer to.
The fungi from Yuggoth or whatever.
That was the fungi from Yuggoth. That's what I was trying to think of with their name.
Yeah.
Their nickname.
Yeah, and Whisper in the Darkness, the story they're most known for, they're described as they're more vegetable than animal, if these terms can be applied to the sort of matter composing them, and have a somewhat fungoid structure, though the presence of a chlorophyll-like substance in a very singular nutrition system differentiating them from all the true chlomatophyte fungi. So basically, they're kind of like a giant lobster or crayfish made out of plant matter.
Okay, I can go with that. The lobster thing for sure.
Yeah, they're up. Do you know where they're supposed to come from?
Pluto or.
So I thought they were very seen or described as extraterrestrial-ish type of thing.
Betelgeuse or something.
I guess it's kind of presumed they come from Pluto because Pluto had just been discovered at the time when Lovecraft wrote the story, and he would make a joke, that they came from there. But I guess technically they say it's a trans-Newtopian object. Utopian, excuse me, I can't get that word out right. So some planet past Neptune, that they're supposed to live from. So it could probably be like Mackie or like some those other little planetoids they've discovered. And most people associate them with Whisper in the Darkness, but they actually appeared a year before in Lovecraft's poem Fungi from Yuggoth. But they didn't get mentioned as Migos. They were just those fun guys.
Yeah.
And Lovecraft had planned a third story with these creatures, but it was left unfinished. But it was made into a movie that starred Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, and it was called The Three Migos.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
I was afraid that's
Yeah.
Wasn't there also a toy line? Migo. There's a bit.
Yeah.
Oh,
there's
yeah.
also there's a drink additive to Migos. It's something to sports additive or flavor additive to put in your water.
But believe it or not, I'm not the first to make that joke. You can actually buy a T-shirt, with with the Three Migos.
Oh God.
Yeah. And I did find online, just as there were the hybrids of the deep ones, someone going by the handle of Cats of Tendalos has created Migo hybrids. And she named one of them Estra. And her voice isn't designed for human communications, so she doesn't speak often. Plus, her mouth is a set of petals that open up like a demented flower. She could pass for human in this COVID age, but she would need some high boots to hide her insectoid legs. And one of the things that's always confused me about the Migos was that, that Lovecraft associated with them the abominable snowmen.
Yeah, that's what I was reading. Yeah, the Migao, was a Tibetan, Yeti, that type, because I was reading some of them on that before the podcast. And the other thing as far as, but the creatures couldn't be, more dissimilar as far as, the Migo and then the Yeti or abominable snowman.
Yeah, I mean, how do you mistake a giant lobster for Bigfoot or vice versa? They just, I just don't see how that can be. It just seems that's like one of the big unfathomable.
and they were the ones that used the canisters to put people's brains in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay. I always thought that was a really cool. That is just. I think that's a really horrible thing when you think about it and how terrible it would be. And it's also pretty cool.
Yeah, it's more of a tangible horror too, as far as with some of the other ones are these kind of amorphous things, that you couldn't describe or whatever. While the Mego were very much, as far as you could describe them, and then there was this very specific horrible thing that they could do. So,
right.
They're more of a tangible horror than an undescribable one.
Yeah, that is definitely one reason why probably that story stands out to me.
Definitely
I always imagine that.
Definitely one of his best realized as far as fleshing it out and having the ideas that all kind of fit together. And like I said, yeah, the canisters and like Richard said, the horror of that. I mean, that's a really, it's a bad way to go.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a very realistically written too, because it's like a lot of times the narrator is not actually witnessing a lot of the stuff. He's like hearing from other people say, and except for the very end, not to give away, but he sees something that kind of confirms him that this all may be true.
Yeah. Did you all listen to that BBC Whisper in Darkness adaptation?
Yeah.
Oh, the Lovecraft Investigations.
Yeah. It kind of goes off in a different direction, but it's not bad. It's pretty good.
I think as far as because they're setting them all really like in modern day and kind of again the true crime podcast age type of thing, as opposed to when they were originally done. So you make various element changes to it based off of that.
Yeah, I thought the first one, Charles Dexter Ward, was probably better, but I did enjoy Whisper in the Darkness. And I haven't had a chance to listen to they got a Shot Over Innsmouth that they've done, but I don't think they've completed it. I think they're still like
no, it's done. They finished.
Yeah. Have they not finished it?
Yeah, I think I listened to the last one back before Christmas at some time. And I don't know if that was wrapping up the whole series or if that was just a pause.
I think that it is, or it felt like that it was, because as far as when I was reading or listening to him, it did feel as far as that was kind of the finale, that it was almost done in like a trilogy format as far as these three stories, and then the way that they were choosing to link them together with those investigator characters and whatnot.
I think you're right.
I had one friend listen to Charles Dexter Ward, and she was asking if this was a true podcast, and I had explained, no,
it's a true crime podcast. It really happened.
Yeah, it's like I guess that was part of their effect. They made somebody think it was actually real events that was going on. They can pull it off. And I have an update on 3 of the Lovecraftian denizens that we discussed in the past. I had finished reading August Dorloff's Trail of Cthulhu. I read the original Weird Tale installments that they did. And I learned so much more about Hester, Cthulhu, and the Baalaki. There's some variant spellings for Cthulhu. You can spell it with a K, or you can spell it Cloolo, or you can spell it Culu, or you can just call him C.
For short.
Yeah.
Or Ray.
Or what?
Or Ray.
Or Ray.
Yeah, you don't. Never mind. That's an old commercial. Forget it. Nobody will know what it is.
Okay.
Forget it. That's stupid. You have to edit that out.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. We're all one take. Darloff has lumped many of the cosmic deities into what was elemental forces. He didn't originate the idea. This one came from Francis T. Langley, who wrote something called the Cthulhu Mythology for an acolyte fanzine, and Darloff asked him to expand upon it. And so Cthulhu is a water being. To quote Darloff, Cthulhu, as an ancient god of water, the seas, a water elemental in a sense, must be considered as a primal deity of the South Pacific. Cthulhu was also just as the master of waters. Hester, the unspeakable, is considered a lords of the air. Narcoleptotep is an earth creature. And a fire being is one we haven't talked about before, and probably one you haven't heard of. It was called Cthulhu.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
And he was something that Darloff created solely so that there could be a fire creature that could fill in the gap that Langley left. And he doesn't get much traction. You don't really see much of Cthulhu and Cthulhu in stories. Though people have drawn some really cool artwork of him online. The great bat-like Balakis are servants of Hester, who are identified by Derleth as him who is not to be named, ancient rival of Cthulhu. So Hester and Cthulhu are don't like each other. And so there's tension in the cosmic pantheon over them. And Hester, according to Derleth, is in a place far removed from our universe, Seleno. Well, the thing is that technically Seleno is in our universe. It's approximately 153 light years away from the sun. This is a star designated in the 16 Tauri in the zodiac constellation of Taurus. It is a member of two star clusters, the Pleiades or the Hyades. I always assumed that the Lake of Hali, where Hester roams, was on Earth, but Derleth informs us that it's located in the Hyades. So it's like a whole bunch of stuff.
I remember those books being fun. They were a lot of fun, and he did go to a lot of great lengths to tie all of that together and create a mythos. So, I mean, I know the Lovecraftian purists aren't up for that, but if you just want a fun read, those books are great.
He definitely took the Cthulhu mythos and made them his own.
Yeah.
And my only problem with the Trail of Cthulhu was that two of the stories almost felt like the same, and seemed like they just had this. There were a lot of stories that had to do with Innsmouth and trying to take care of the deep ones, and
yeah,
all that. But Hester is able to communicate with us humans from his planet through a kind of hypnosis, and he's imprisoned there, but it's not explained how. But I'm started reading Trail of Cthulhu, and I figured that might I started reading Return of Hester, and I figured that might explain more about why Hester is imprisoned. And if you wish to call forth a Balaki, a few steps are required. First, you drink from a mead, which render the drinker insensible to the effects of time and space and enable him to travel in those dimensions, while at the same time heightening his sensory perception. Next, you blow upon a strange stone whistle. And finally, And we are back. It looks like Hester didn't like what I was talking about and decided to cut off all communications between us. And so we're just going to move on to the next topic, and hopefully he'll forgive us and we'll be able to move on. Miss Matok 5, it's come out. So Richard, how disappointed were you with it?
Yeah, I think as far as less so even with the story, just because of the fact, again, they're just seeming to, how many Lovecraft references can we make in 5 issues? But the big thing, I think it bothered me more than that, with that afterword at the end where he compares H.P. Lovecraft and J. Edgar Hoover and creates this false equivalency between the two of them, as far as there were some good things and some bad things about both of them. Like, no, that's no. You on one hand talking about somebody, with these gross abuses of power and violations of civil liberties during his, and that got worse as he got older, versus with Lovecraft, like I said, some undercurrents of xenophobia and racism that you've noted as well started to, as far as he started to kind of grow out of that as a writer as he got on older. These two things are not the same.
No.
Yeah.
So, you're trying to create this because they have the fact, I guess, as far as that, he was also using J. Edgar Hoover in there. But as far as, he only popped up really kind of like at the beginning, as far as giving them their assignment or whatever. That I can't think left a bad taste in my mouth about like the whole thing altogether. So, more so than even like the story itself, it had just kind of ended where it ended. But that business at the end, with these two are 2 peas in a pod. I'm like, no, they are not. I do not agree with that at all.
I imagine that J. Edgar Hoover did a lot more damage, to people's lives.
Yeah, as far as somebody who committed actual crimes versus somebody who now is being seen as kind of a tut. There was a lot of this things that we don't like in some of his writings, the same way that I guess really nowadays you're seeing as far as somebody said something bad on the internet being the equivalent of held in with the same regard as someone committing an actual crime against someone. And these two things are not the same. They're just not.
Yeah, well, that aside, I guess one thing that really jarred me, I guess, like in there was that one line where he says, like, Edward Darby, come on in out of the cool air. There was like they're really forcing all these like references to Lovecraft,
That's terrible. I'm glad
Yeah.
I've not been reading that, actually.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. The other book that series that he did, there are two of them prior to this. One of them was Graveyard of Empires, and he did God Killers, and God Killers very effectively it was kind of like a military themed, mini series about this, like, task forces that dealt with these mythological supernatural threats that weaved in a lot of Middle Eastern mythology and Russian folklore and that kind of thing. That was very, very well done. So I was really looking forward to seeing then, now he's going to be, taking on the Lovecraft, mythos. And then it was just this spot the reference fest that it didn't hold together very well.
I would just recommend just pick up the first issue of it, because the first issue is really good. And it's like but then it just derailed after that.
Yeah. Because the next episode was the issue was the one with the, did you hear those rats in the walls last night? Dr. West. Hello. They walk past a room and Dr. West is in there going hello and introduces himself as the reanimator.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Dr. West, I'm guessing he's alive and well and recovering from his zombie bite pretty well.
Yeah. He shook it off
since he made that appearance at the end last.
He took some antibiotics and he's fine now.
Yeah, a little rubbing alcohol, witch hazel, and all that. It took care of it. And what did you think about do you think the ending of it, that deep one with the eyes, the yellow eyes, was Miranda Keller? Is that what they're trying to say at that last?
I think that's what he's going for there, as some type of, ending on a, ha ha ha, the supernatural, forces have won out in the end, but then they're being corralled by the FBI and locked away from preying on humanity.
Yes. So if there was a Miss Matonic 2 to come out, would you buy it, Richard?
No. I'd need someone else to, go review it first, and tell me whether it improved or not.
Yeah. See, find out whether he redeemed himself. He got all the bad stuff out, so he could tell the story he really wanted to tell.
I don't know what he left, because as far as, in terms of there's references to so many, it's not like he left himself, other material to work with.
Yeah, I'm sure he could have come up with something. I'm sure there's probably something he regretted not like shoehorning into there.
Well, I've just seen that kind of, because it's not the first, as far as this isn't even like a novel approach, as far as a comic that based off of that takes, incorporates Lovecraftian elements in an original story, as far as that's concerned. So as far as not really breaking any new ground, with what you're doing, you'd at least want to have it a little more cohesive, and trying to like tell a story, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to throw as many Lovecraft characters and entities and references as I can into 5 issues and think that amounts to something.
Yeah, I was like, I was really pleased with the first issue. I thought it was going to be quite good, and then it just got worse and worse and worse. And it's like those dumb lines, like the rats in the walls and come out from the cool air. It's it just went to a cringe. Yeah. I thought it was interesting. They're doing kind of like an alternate universe, of the Lovecraft's, stories, but it's like it was like you only had like a general idea of what to do, but then didn't know what to do with it afterwards. Once he got the job to do it, he was like, what do I write now?
Well, if you're going to only have 5 issues, you want to keep your focus, a little bit tighter than throw as many things as I can into them.
Yeah.
And I've just seen that type of thing done better elsewhere, as far as, again, Providence still being kind of like the gold standard as far as that's concerned. But other people have utilized, a lot of Lovecraftian elements, in their stories. Mike Mignola, I guess, is, always kind of my go-to as far as the fact, utilizing those in Hellboy or in that Batman Elseworlds, the Doom that came to Gotham, stuff like that, as far as, very seamlessly kind of weaving these Lovecraft elements, into stories without it feeling like he's throwing 100 of them at you all at once and expecting you to get every reference.
Yeah, they basically just took the stories they needed, to tell the story.
Right.
So they didn't try to bombard you with so much stuff. I don't know why they felt that'd be such a crowd pleaser. People would want to read all of that, and I think it'd been different if you did like a comedy or something, like sent up a farce of Lovecraft, where it says well, I can't believe those rats in those walls, and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Pull it off.
If it were instead only being like a parody or a satiristic, type of Lovecraft thriller, where it's, something Leslie Nielsen would have been in.
Yeah, because it's like Alan Moore threw in a lot of references into like Providence, but they all worked. They
Yeah.
all like they added something to this to the overall story. Oh, well. Anyway, Sam, our most dedicated listener and unofficial fourth member of this podcast, thanked us for warning him to avoid the movie Thing on the Doorstep. He does have another movie for us that he's curious about. It's The Deep Ones. And this one's a little difficult to watch because I can't find it. It's streaming anywhere, and it's not even out on DVD. The only way one can watch The Deep Ones is through film festivals.
Huh.
A trailer was available online, so we were able to see it at least. And did you see it, Richard?
The trailer?
Yeah, the trailer for Deep Ones.
No, I haven't watched that yet.
Yeah, well,
I'll check it out.
Yeah, well, it's probably it's like given everything else that. Well, I'll explain later on. IMDb describes the plot as a married couple rents a beach house site Airbnb only to be surrounded by peculiar neighbors and occurrences. They soon discover that they're in the grips of a mysterious cult and their ancient sea god. And you made the joke, Richard, that Robert Miano was in it. And he's a character actor people probably have seen in a movie or TV show before, such as the mugger in the original Death Wish movie, or as a jogger in Cagney and Lacey, but never knew his name. He's gotten media roles in his later years, and Richard and I and Sam saw him in the disappointingly not funny horror-y Exorcism at 60,000 Feet.
Oh, he's that guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that bodes well for the quality of the Deep Ones. So.
Yeah, he played the Catholic priest fighting off the possessed on the airliner. And that fact alone compelled Sam to not watch The Deep Ones. But when I found out that Jed Farron had directed both of these movies, that just made Deep Ones so toxic that we'll probably need to be paid before we can watch it.
Yeah, I think you should, pivot your efforts from trying to track this movie down into something more worthwhile.
At least $100 or a trip to somewhere nice. And Sam did send a link to a very funny parody of The Love Boat that was called The Lovecraft. That was really well done. It had Obadiah Marsh as the captain and Herbert West as the ship doctor. And Ted Lance resumes his role as the bartender, Isaac Washington. And the list of guest stars is quite inspiring. We have S.T. Josie and Stuart Gordon and Charo as passengers. So they had a lot of fun doing that one.
It was really well done. I get a good laugh out of that.
Yeah, and it was so simple, that it was very effective. And but you can go on YouTube, and I'm not exactly sure how you would type in to find that. Sam just sent us a link to it, but if you type in Lovecraft, there's no telling what you're going to get. You just do that.
Yeah, you might be poking around for a while.
Yeah, all that. But if anyone's interested in seeing it, just let me know. You can contact me at what's our email address here, David?
Good question. Good question.
Well, we'll figure it out later on. Anyway, David, you found a post on Reddit that you wanted to discuss, talking about like the grounding of Cthulhu mythos and modern discoveries. So, what would you like to say about it?
I'm not remembering that.
You don't.
When did I say that?
It was a Lovecraftian entity posing as him.
All right, he's like you've been taken over by the egos.
Yeah. Okay, I'd have to go back and find the. I know what you're talking about, but yes, there are a lot of interesting little parallels that can be drawn between some of the stories if you want to really stretch things out. But
here is the opening paragraph that it was like to the Reddit article. It says, "Let's face it, the hit and miss nature of his purple prose aside, Lovecraft's works haven't quite aged as well as we would like, mainly because the science he based much of his ideas on has moved forward quite a bit. Still, it's interesting to see how modern discoveries can be used to put new twists on old classics." So that was the.
There's a subreddit called Cthulhu. There's a subreddit called Lovecraft. Lovecraft is more. The Lovecraft subreddit is a little bit more literary oriented because it talks more about stories and things like that. Cthulhu is more artwork oriented, it seems like. But I'm sorry, I totally forgot about that other thing. I should have gone back and looked. I apologize. So so I suck.
Okay. Well, anyway, so do you feel that Lovecraft's works have haven't aged well, or?
They could use some sprucing up if somebody wanted. I don't know. You can't just rewrite them, but at the same time, the ideas are so good that yeah, that part holds up. But actually reading them or trying to get them back out to a larger audience, it's going to be a tough sell.
I've kind of considered Lovecraft, not necessarily as dated, I don't consider like Huckleberry Finn or Jane Austen dated. He was almost like a time capsule. He was writing of a certain time period.
Right.
And any scientific inaccuracies, like how we're talking about Pluto, that Pluto was called a planet, then. Now we call it a planetoid. And so any scientific inaccuracies, I kind of attributed more to the limited understanding of the characters.
Yeah. Well, it's the science of the era as far as in terms of what they were aware of at the time. That doesn't mean as far as that, because we progressed a little further, in that then this makes these, stories irrelevant or, as you said, outdated.
But I do feel that as opposed to like new authors, writing stuff, that they would take the new discoveries, and expand upon them, what Lovecraft said, and not necessarily just try to rehash, what has been written before, but try to tell something new and different.
Right. Or like, you said, taking these, the elements and the entities and that type of thing that he introduced and putting them into even like settings that weren't fathomable at the time. There's a video game called The Moons of Madness that's set on like a Mars colony that then incorporates a bunch of Lovecraftian, entities, a lot of like claustrophobia and isolation and that type of thing. And you really, during the era that he was writing, wouldn't have thought, oh, I'm going to set this story on, a Mars colony or really or something along those lines, as far as that's concerned, because that wasn't, something that had been feasible.
Yeah, that was because he tried to ground his stuff as much as into reality as possible, and to make it more believable. And a Mars colony story would have been a little bit of a stretch for him, the time period.
Right. Yeah, as far as, that's too out there,
Well, but, kind of circling back to I guess the main thing that got me interested in what parallels between modern day and the events in his books were all the discoveries recently in Antarctica with, we found these ancient viruses that, they're thousands of years old. Well, yeah, nothing's bad's going to happen with that, I'm sure.
There's no precedent for this being a bad situation where we should just leave these things frozen and walk away.
Right, yeah. The whole Mountains of Madness thing, there's really some mountains there that we found, they're really there. So I don't know. There's a lot of little things like that have happened.
If I remember correctly, Lovecraft based a lot of that in Antarctica, on the actual discoveries of Antarctica at the time. Of course, a lot has changed since then, with not just global warming and all that, but, they find new things. But, like the microscopic, stuff, somebody, today can make a really cool story just by taking, almost like incorporating At the Mountains of Madness to kind of like update the story, make it a little bit more realistic to a modern audience today.
Right.
Yeah. And all that. Anyway, there was a movie we watched, all three of us, that had a few Lovecraftian themes to it. We thought about discussing Intersect. And so, what's y'all's opinion of that movie?
Good idea. Poor execution, I guess.
Yeah, the most succinct review for it is I like their ideas and their ambition, but the execution is where things kind of, didn't live up to that same level.
Yeah.
I guess for the audience who may not have seen it, can you explain what the movie was about?
It's been a little too long since I watched it, to be honest. You guys watched it since I did.
That as far as they're incorporating trying to build like a time travel device, and the initial, your initial clue that it's some Lovecraftian is the Miskatonic. They're doing it at Miskatonic University, that kind of thing. And then there's the mankind shouldn't tamper with these types of things because you pierce the veil of what we know of science and physics, and there are awful monsters lurking behind it. the trailer does make you think though that it's going to be much more of kind of a gun or a out there, much trippy type of film, whereas those types of scenes there's very few of those.
Yeah.
Most of it is very more just about the relationship between these three scientists, in terms of, and then flashing back to, with the time travel element, you then get into like their childhood and when they first met and all that kind of thing. And that's where 80% of the movie is as a result. And then as a result, it also hinges on their acting and their performances. And then if those aren't all that good or drawing you in, then you're just waiting for the monsters to show up at that point.
Well, the trailer was so good, there was no way the movie was good. Once the movie got started, I'm like, there's no way it's going to live up to this trailer. And they probably could have been less ambitious, made the movie somewhat shorter, or even made it into a short film instead of a full-blown attempt at a movie, and come out with a much, much better, tighter story that had a lot more impact than what it did once you stretched everything out the way it happened.
Yeah, I felt like I was watching the rejected season of Lost. It was like I think my favorite part was when Nate was attempting to, take himself through the time machine. Instead, became like a pool of blood. But it doesn't make any sense later on in the movie when, like, through time travel, we see him, later on trying to warn the younger self of his friend not to do something, but he ends up getting killed. And so I'm a little bit confused by that scene. It's like,
I was assuming there that it's either A, it looked cool for all the blood, or B, we could do a Marvel no prize on it and say that, okay, here's what happened, is that's his body being drawn back to his point of origin after he dies, and then it liquefies at that point.
Yeah, but there should have been something more, because it's like it seemed like he knew a lot more. Plus he had clothes on, so he had to be doing a lot of things.
Yeah, you felt like his journey had gone on for a long time, because he did say, as far as I've been looking for you for a long period of time, so you felt maybe that he was unstuck in time and bouncing around and trying to track down his younger versions of his friends to try to help out.
It was directed by Gus Howerder. This is his first feature film. So. About the biggest name star is the James Morrison, who played Bill Buchanan in the TV series 24.
I knew I'd seen that guy somewhere before. He was their mentor, was the only actor I could place in that, and that's where it was. Is the head of CTU on 24.
He was also Warden Dwight Murphy in the 2017 series of Twin Peaks, so you might have seen him there.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I don't think he was in that as much as 24. Yeah, he had a larger role in 24. That's where I remember him from.
Yeah. So he was probably their biggest name actor. The others I'd never seen before.
Yeah, I didn't recognize anybody.
Yeah. Alrighty, and I understand y'all been watching or listening to some podcast, like Call the Void.
Mm-hmm.
So
worth a listen for sure. Lots of Lovecraftian nonsense going on in there.
So what's it about?
I think it starts out with these two siblings finding out that their father, I guess he's disappeared, or they've been called and he's in a hospital in another state, and he's like sort of lost his mind, and they're trying to figure out, well, what in the world? Dad's a stable guy, and he just up and disappears, and now he's in a mental institution up in Ohio or whatever it is. So they have to figure out what happened to him and how he got that way. And in the meantime, since it's the beginning of it is set in New Orleans, there's some sort of, I guess you might call it almost a disease or something going around, and people are starting to lose their memories and just like their father, and sort of end up needing hospitalization. And Richard may be able to better describe it than me.
I'm only 2 episodes in, so it's fun. I just started it and recommended it the other day.
Yeah. It's good. It's consistent. I'll give it that.
And there's also another one, Wandering It with the Dead. It's described as
that's only there's only 3 4 episodes of that thing out so far. I really like it as far as that it's a very kind of gritty, brutal Western with the smattering of, some foreshadowing of supernatural stuff going on. Where basically your protagonist is somebody who's basically, he's got a dead body that he's trying to bring back, somewhere so he can get the bounty to be paid on it. And it's all the people, he's encountering, along his way, of his journey to try to get back there, while at the same time the body's decomposing, so he can't really afford to get distracted or detoured or anything like that for too long.
I saw it was described as the old man in the sea meets the shining in the old west. Does that sound about accurate?
Yeah, that's the description that got me initially. I was like, oh wait, I like that. That sounds good.
Yeah, that's a very different one. All right. Well,
let me make sure I subscribe to the correct one. What's the title of that one again?
Wandering with the Dead.
Wandering with the Dead.
Okay.
All right. Well, anybody else want to talk about?
I was going to say that you can get, if you are interested in finding out anything about Kirk Munroe, you can download one audiobook off of LibriVox. It's called The Copper Princess. I did download it a couple days ago and started it, but it seems pretty dated. But it's like, I think it is, like you said, it's more of a boy's adventure type thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of his stuff is also available through some public domain sites, like Bloomberg Press and stuff like that.
Right.
LibriVox, kind of the problem I have with that a lot of times, they have a lot of volunteers reading those stories. And so sometimes they don't get the best people, the most dramatic people to read that. So it kind of hurts me I have a hard time listening to LibriVox recordings a lot of times.
Some of them are not the best, I'll give you that, but
There was a Flatland that they did. I think that was just done strictly by a computer. I mean, it had this really flat computer voice reading it, and I really had a hard time with that one. Yeah. Anyway, Dave and Richard, I see the stars are no longer right. We must cease all discussions until they align again next month. 30 Minutes of H.P. Lovecraft is sponsored by the Lovecraft Cruise Line to the wonderful Black Island of Raleigh. This podcast was created in association with the LovecraftPod.com and the Logan Speculative Fiction Group, with the help from the Logan County Public Library and the Lovecraft Eternal Facebook page, the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast, and the Great Old Ones. Special thanks to Katie Tyson for her technomancy and Joshua Dukes for his ghost ship. You can listen to past episodes at anchor.fm/LCPL. That's anchor.fm/LCPL. And until we meet again, may you avoid the wrath of Princess Cthulhu and her tickets to see the deep ones.